Check, 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 check.
Hello?
Check, 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 check. Check, 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 check. Have a seat wherever you want.
Where would you prefer?
I'm going to use this mic to introduce
Okay, you want the middle? Cool. This looks also very nice.
We'll get started in just a second. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Clements Place. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So glad you're here. I'm Elizabeth Searles. I'm archivist at the Institute of Jazz Studies, here to introduce tonight's speakers. I'm really excited to be the host for our conversation tonight, Vinyl is the Future, because my little brother is 21. I'm a lot older than he is. And that's all he has is a record player. So when I saw this conversation was happening, I was like, oh, I'm gonna get the inside scoop on what my little brother's generation is all about. So anyways, before I introduce our speakers, I want to remind everyone we have a couple shows lined up at Clements later this week, if I'm not mistaken. They're not posted yet, so don't take this as the final word, but just check Eventbrite and the Facebook page for the information. But as far as I know, Jamel Davis will be performing on Thursday at Clements and Nat Adderley Jr. on Friday. I also want to just mention a couple events coming up at the Newark Public Library. Reggie Blanding is our moderator tonight. I'll tell you a little bit about him in a second, but because we're partners with the Newark Public Library on a lot of our programming, their Black History Month celebration is coming up. Their first event is this Saturday at 2 p.m. It's an event about Jerry Gant on February 8th. They have a panel discussion on, it doesn't say on here. Performing Arts. February 15th, they have a discussion on literature. And February 29th, they have a final closing discussion on hip hop. All right. So we hope to see you guys there. There's information on the flyer on the table by the entrance. So if you guys want to find out more, grab a flyer. So anyways, we're exceedingly fortunate tonight to witness the conversation between these three experts in the realm of recorded music history. Our moderator, Reggie Blanding, there in the middle, is head librarian at the James Brown Room at the Newark Public Library, and he's currently a graduate student in the American Studies Department at Rutgers Newark. He's been collecting vinyl for decades and brings a deep love and knowledge to his role as moderator for our discussion tonight. But the catalyst for this evening's discussion is really Larry Jafee, who's been a lecturer of journalism at Rutgers University, Newark's Arts, Culture, and Media Department since January 2023, and a thought leader in the vinyl resurgence since 2017. You can check out his website at larryjafee.com, and that's Larry, Jaffee.com. Before joining Rutgers, he taught media studies at the New York Institute of Technology for a decade and received their Presidential Award for Excellence in Teaching in 2021. He's the author of the 2022 book, Record Store Day, The Most Improbable Comeback of the 21st Century, and also co-founder, conference director of Making Vinyl, which is makingvinyl.com. You can learn more about it on the web. That's a business-to-business conference celebrating the global rebirth of record manufacturing. His book, Record Store Day, won the 2023 Association for Recorded Sound Collections Award for Best Historical Research on Record Labels. Larry's a friend of the Institute and regularly brings his students to visit, for which we remain very grateful. And finally, our guest from out of town, who we're thrilled to have, longtime friend of the Institute as well, is Zev Feldman. He's an internationally recognized Grammy-nominated independent record producer and the co-president of Resonance Records in Los Angeles. He's also a consulting producer of archival and historical recordings for Blue Note Records. He's been dubbed the Indiana Jones of jazz by Stereophile magazine and is widely known as the Jazz Detective. Over the last 30 years, he's worked for Polygram, Universal Music Group, Rhino, Warner Music Group, Concord Music Group, among others. In 2016, he was voted Rising Star Producer in Downbeat Magazine's International Critics Poll, and he was voted Producer of the Year in 2022 and 2023. That's pretty awesome.
Pretty lucky guy.
Pretty talented guy. In 2022, he launched his own Deep Digs music group venture and jazz detective label in partnership with Elemental Music, and has also worked with Verve label group, Impulse, Reel to Reel Recordings, Thompson Square, Sunset Boulevard Records, Real Gone Music, and many other labels. That's a really long list. That's a lot. You've done a lot. I'm impressed. Feldman has recently relocated back to Washington, D.C. after living in L.A. for the past 17 years. So please join me in giving a very, very warm welcome to tonight's guests.
Thank you for that introduction, Elizabeth, and thank you to the Institute of Jazz Studies for having me here amongst these two greats. Just meeting Zev and familiar with Larry recently, so I'm truly honored to sit up here with both these gentlemen and kind of take in some of that inspiration and learn about their journeys. I have a series of random questions typed up on papers, but I think just from the small talk we had just even prior to coming here, I think we're just, you may have to just like shut us down. So, but of course, with always like to start at anyone I meet, their origin story, anyone I meet who's doing work I find particularly interesting. So for both of you, I just want to ask what set you off on your journey, I would say music-wise, so the origins, what made you appreciate music, maybe music on vinyl, and maybe at what point were you like, oh, I could make a career out of this. So either Larry, if you want to start.
Okay. Thanks, Rich. Also, I just want to mention, Elizabeth was the second person I met at Rutgers when I was hired. The first one was the administrative assistant of my department, and I was searching around the website, and I saw that the Institute of Jazz Studies was here, and honestly, I didn't know that. And I said, I'm really going to like this job. But anyway, to your question, my grandmother in 1964 gave me an AM transistor radio, and it coincided with Beatlemania, and it opened up my entire world. And the next year was the World's Fair, so my very first record was a 45 of It's a Small World After All. I still have that record, in fact. It's on my website. So, yeah, from there, Motown, the British Invasion, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, I mean, all of it. And my very first record purchase wasn't actually vinyl or record. It was a cassette of Chuck Berry's London sessions with the hit My Ding-a-Ling.
Classic. And just, I would say, at what point maybe was there like I don't know, maybe it just happened organically, a light bulb moment where you're like, I can start writing about this, the work you're doing, we'll get more into that. But.
Yeah, no, I was in high school. I started writing reviews. I remember one of the reviews was a Rod Stewart in the Faces live at Nassau Coliseum, and my byline was left off of it. I was so mad. But soon thereafter, at Hofstra, where I was an undergrad, I joined my first review was like the second week school started of the last version of the New York Dolls. Yeah. So I mean, I was writing for a Long Island weekly called Good Times pretty regularly at that point, and any place that would, let me write for them, I would. Those first years in college.
Awesome, thank you. And Brother Zev, how does one become the Indiana Jones of jazz records?
Well, it's really interesting. I think my journey with music really started first and foremost with my parents' record collection, which was a whole other universe to me when I was a very young boy. And my parents had Beatles records, Nancy Wilson and Cannonball Adderley, Jimmy Smith, classical, Greek folk music, all sorts of different things. And I just fell in love with listening. And I remember just over and over discovering new things. And there were certain recordings that really, like the Beatles' White Album. I know people know me for my work in jazz, but I'm an audiophile across numerous genres. But I had a chance to really connect in another realm with deep listening, and it really opened me up. I think about the White Album in particular. It was an album my dad had, and he was tired of turning the records over for me, so he actually put it onto a reel-to-reel so he could start it and then play it start to finish, and he could walk away, and I would just listen for like 90 minutes straight. But it really led to self-discovery and reading of books, and my high school years were spent really researching. Larry and I were talking earlier about Robert Christgau of the Village Voice, and that in many ways was a barometer for me, whether that was listening to Agartha from Miles Davis or even getting turned on James Brown and Richard and Linda Thompson, all sorts of different things. It accelerated my learning. I went into the music business when I was 20 years old. I was going to school in Rockville, Maryland. I was a communications broadcasting major, and I ended up doing an internship at Polygram Records in January of 1994, and it really just went from there, from working in the mailroom afterwards to going to New York, working at Polygram and these other record labels that were mentioned from Elizabeth before. It's been an incredible journey, but it's always, at the end of the day, it's about my personal passion and interest in calling families and trying to different archives, trying to uncover recordings that, first of all, make me excited, and then it's my job also to work with the investors and the money people at the various labels to see if we can connect those passions. So it's a variety of things. Anyways, it's been extraordinary. I feel very privileged and blessed.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think both of you said family sort of were your gateway, and yeah, I think same. Aunts and uncles who had a lot of records in their collections, things I didn't know about in Rolling Stone, Isaac Hayes, and a fold-out record with the chain. So I feel like just family, the importance of family introducing you, or maybe you're just some nosy kid digging around in the living room and they want you out the way. So, but I'm glad that has led us to this moment here.
And in my family too, there are a lot of musicians that are in my family, including my great uncle who toured the world with Les Brown and a band of renown. His name was Alvin Abe Aaron. And my Uncle Joey, and so many other cousins of mine. Music is just a big part of our family, so getting into jazz was a whole other chapter as well, but a lot of discovery for the last several decades, just researching and listening.
Oh, okay. Also in my family, my mother worked for a music publisher in the mid-'50s, and my father, when they married, my father demanded that she quit her job so she can be a housewife. Which really, but meanwhile, one of the clients of that would feed songs to this very popular singer, Johnny Mathis. So I found, when I cleaned out the house, I found promo copies of the singles of Wonderful, Wonderful, and things like that, and Frank Sinatra EPs on 7-inch, and also, but she was very eclectic in her taste. She had Whitney Houston's first album. Amazing cassette collection of Aretha Franklin, blues, like the Columbia stuff, and Tony Bennett stuff. Who I got to meet once. So yeah, I mean, and then my father worked in a Columbia Records warehouse after he got out of the Army, and I said to him, "Why did you quit that job?" Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That I think again, family as a conduit to discovery has been a big part of my own journey. And my father, I didn't know him until later years, but I met his record collection initially, and also had eclectic tastes where from yacht rock to Whispers albums and Buddha labels and things like that, which was reflected in me early before I knew him, and things that made so much sense later down the line. But since we said the word discovery, one of the things I'm super curious about, just the work you've done to sort of track down and curate projects for residents. I know, anything about, I know there's Wes McGovern finding the DAT tapes, and just the story or maybe the flashpoint where you were like, oh, all this stuff is still out there waiting to be discovered and shared with the world. So maybe like the flashpoint there and a great discovery you're particularly proud of.
Well, I got to say the flashpoint, first of all, being a lifelong music fan, and the first 15 years of my career were spent in sales and marketing for record companies and working in distribution with labels. But it's oftentimes stay in your lane, sales and marketing guy. That's what you're there for. But I met a gentleman in 2009 named George Claben, who has changed my life forever. I owe this man so much because I initially joined Resonance Records to help build the international distribution network for us at the time, working in distribution for many years. But I'll never forget, sometimes around 2009 or so, George said to me one day, Zev, I don't understand. You know all this information about music, you've been collecting it forever, but you've never produced an album before, right? I said, yeah. He said, I want to change that. Amazing. He said, I'm going to make you a little proposition, a little offer. If you can go out and you can find straight ahead jazz that I like and you like, I'm not talking about reissues, Zev. I'm talking about something that's never been out before. I'll tell you what, I'll let you produce it for me. And I've said this time and time again, it was like fire on gasoline. Gave me a reason to leap out of bed in the morning, a chance to research tapes and recordings from artists who I personally admire, to working with institutions such as INA out of France that oversees the Radio France and the ORTF archives. It's just been so much of a personal journey that started me, and it continues. But George started this, and then the record started selling. We put out an album called Some Other Time in 2016, and it was a never-before-issued studio album from Bill Evans. And that was like putting a wing on the building in terms of giving a lot of support and relaying the confidence that was needed. But George, first of all, in 2010, we did 2 records. You were mentioning Wes Montgomery, a hero of mine who I've been listening to since I've been listening to music with my father, even as a teenager. And then, we put out these recordings called Echoes of Indiana Avenue, and that was in 2010, 2011. Thank you very much. I saw some hands clapping at the bar. But that was the first previously unissued music from Wes, and the whole album's worth probably about 25, 30 years. And it was extraordinary what happened. And building a great project and having, I'll wrap this up here, but having the inspiration to curate something. And the same with Bill Evans' Live at Top of the Gate, which were tapes that George Claben had made in 1968 at the Village Gate, Top of the Gate Club in New York. I felt like I wanted to take this curational inspiration, when I think about Michael Kaskuna and Charlie Lurie, what they created at Mosaic with great liner notes and packaging, to what Michael Lang and Richard Seidel were doing at Verve in the 90s and being a witness to that. It was taking that box set mentality of having a huge book with all sorts of information and putting that with even a 2 LP and a 2 CD set. And we've kind of been going with that model. It's just driven by personal taste. It's all passion. And I feel very grateful for that.
That's great. Yeah. And was there any particular, I mean, I'm sure y'all do great work, so I'm sure you're proud of everything y'all do, but any particular moment that just like a highlight of like, it's just something maybe you just came across in a random way that led into like some major release for Resonance?
Well, the Bill Evans Live at Top of the Gate and Wes Montgomery's Echoes of Indiana Avenue came out within 6 months of each other, I want to say in 2011. Those were very career-defining moments in terms of getting people's attention, of the love that we wanted to devote to these packages. But let's talk about a guy from Newark, New Jersey, Larry Young, one of the greatest organ players, pianist, keyboardist, you might want to say. And he's someone that's a really big influence on me musically. The album Unity was just something that I played the heck out of. And we started working with the folks at INA, which is this amazing archive in France. And they've been documenting music for a long time. But anyways, we found recordings of Larry Young that had never been issued before. And when you're an Uber fan, like I consider myself, with this artist in particular, and with all these releases I work with, it's stuff that I'm excited about. It's gotta be. I can't turn the ignition. I've done that in my career. I've had other projects that I've worked earlier years that I wasn't always necessarily enthusiastic about. It's part of your job. But that's what's so special about in a place where I'm at now. I can connect that passion. But Larry Young having 2 CDs, 2 LPs of never before issued material, I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. And especially when you love this artist, and then for the reception it got. And even Aurora Avaris, the Francis Davis poll, the former NPR Critics poll, it won the archival recording of the year. It's like validation. It's just been so many different feels and emotions and so many gifts that I've had a chance to be a part of. These journeys, they're not just making an album, they're an experience that stays with us. And I feel so grateful.
I know it's a reissue, but one of my holy grails that I hope to find one day is Lawrence of Newark, which came out in 1973. I always said that, you know, Larry's mother and my mother had the same idea. But I grew up in Queens, but a little different. But one thing about what Zev was talking about was, you know, when you were furnishing, sales and marketing, going to record stores, I basically, when I was in my early 30s, I lived within a 15-minute walk of the downtown Tower Records in Manhattan, in the East Village. And this was pre-internet. So on a Sunday night, if there was nothing on television, I'd go down there and I said, you know, I'm an adult now. I have to learn about jazz. This is ridiculous. I think I had one Miles Davis greatest hits album prior to that. And so I'd hang out in the jazz department and spend 2 hours and just, you know, pump the clerk, you know, for information. And I remember once I said to him, what's playing right now? And he says, Mingus. I said, what album? He goes, oh, yeah. I said, you have it on CD? Because I was just basically building my CD collection at that point. And he says, oh, no. So I said, he has, but I have it on LP, on vinyl. I was like, all right, I'll buy it. Now, but one thing about that is, and in fact, my friend Rick is in the audience. We know each other from the CD days. I edited a magazine for 8 years about CD and DVD production. Like you were saying about your career, that was like the first full-time job I had that was close to the entertainment business. It was the back end. You know, we covered manufacturing, a little bit distribution. I did get to interview people like Lou Reed, you know, some of my heroes, about talking about the business, not so much about the music itself. But in terms of what happened after that, the magazine ran its, course. Napster happened. They sold the company. They laid me off. And I was basically done with physical media. I just basically, out of a moment of madness, I sold 4,000 LPs, 3,000 CDs, 2,000 DVDs. I kept 2 boxes of vinyl. And I said, and it said in magic marker, do not touch. One of those boxes disappeared. So, and some really valuable things gone. And like Miles Davis's Jack Johnson album. That was, yeah. So, yeah, I'm a,
Butcher cover?
But but the interesting thing, I didn't have Butcher cover, but the other Beatle record stuff. Although my German Revolver, I still have. That was in the right box. So, yeah.
And the Butcher cover in reference to the Beatles.
But I spent the last 12 years rebuilding that collection to its former glory. At a great expense, by the way.
And by the way, I got to say, I love when people talk about Tower Records in Greenwich Village, because I remember growing up in D.C. and taking the train to New York so that we could go record shopping and hang out in the Village. And yeah, there was Revolver Records and Generation at 210 Thompson Street, where I used to get some boots. And, West Connoisseur spot. But I got to tell you, there was such a beat. There was a feeling going on when you would get on that floor at Tower, 4th and Broadway, all the people running around. And I was a rep for that store at Polygram Distribution in 1995. 21 years old, I moved to New York. And I just remember just the feeling of, it was so robust, and it'd be exciting, and you'd see people like Henry Rollins or David Byrne that would come in and go shopping. But man, that was just one of the pinnacle moments. I mean, what a great record store that was.
Well, here's an untold story about bootlegs. So in early 2001, there was a sweep. The FBI made a sweep of a bunch of stores in the Village that was selling bootleg CDs mostly. And very few people know this. So after 9/11, the FBI had all of the evidence at the World Trade Center. So after 9/11, they had to abandon the case because all the evidence disappeared. Yeah.
Wow. No, that's I've never heard that. That's amazing.
And they used to do that all the time. That happened in cycles. Oh, the feds came in and busted a bunch of record stores in the West Village. It seems nowadays, it sounds kind of interesting. I wouldn't say funny. Intellectual property rights and respecting them is always a very, very serious matter. The fact that we pay the musicians and the sidemen and the publishing, there's a whole other world where that doesn't exist. But anyways, I wanted to say that those things, it used to seem to me, the word would get out, oh, the feds went to this store in the Village and they busted them, and like you would see that would happen from time to time,
and
right?
by the way, I used to write for the Tower Records Pulse magazine back in the day. And in fact, right before the pandemic, I was a consultant to the revival of the brand. And then the pandemic had a hit, and they changed their business plan. So, and my father passed away. I was caught up in a lot of other stuff. But they are back as an e-commerce entity, which is nice.
And just to your point about there's a clip online from years ago. I think maybe you both seen it. Neil Young going into a store, maybe in New York, and finding bootleg copies of his record on the shelves, and basically letting them know how much he does not appreciate that. So that might be something to some post discussion context if you want to check that out when you get home. Since we're in the record stores, I definitely want to just jump into, Larry did a amazing book on Record Store Day. So if you can just maybe give some some history
Yeah.
to where that,
So it was interesting. For 10 years, I was writing about cybersecurity, and I was laid off in the end of September 2020. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do now? I was teaching at NYIT at that point, but I was still doing some writing for a couple other people. But and then the next week, Michael Kurtz, co-founder of Record Store Day, calls me and says, what do you think about writing a book about the history of Record Store Day? I said, I was born to write that book. Timing was perfect. And one of the first people I called for an interview was Zev. Michael, gave me a list of, people he thinks belonged in the book, and Resonance, track record, putting out records for Record Store Day was very important to that. What's interesting about the book was it's sort of like Woodstock. People claimed they were there at the beginning of Record Store Day, the founding of Record Store Day, or they invented Record Store Day. And then when you do the digging, you find out, well, it was a collective group of people, but some of them really weren't involved. And the best was like in Newberry Comics. I was basically told an individual was at the meeting, that very pivotal meeting, where they greenlit the concept. But the thing is, these three coalitions of independent record stores got together. And earlier that year, Tower Records went Chapter 7. They liquidated. And that was either an opportunity or it was their, death in terms of, we have to find something else to do. And the interesting thing about the book is that it basically talks about all the great musicians over the years who started working at record stores. And the people who actually end up owning the record stores, they couldn't see working for somebody else. They were like, we're all social misfits, and although I didn't work at a record store until I was 55 years old, and I wouldn't really say it's work, my friend said, can you watch the store this day? And finally, Zev and I were talking about this. When we were teenagers, we could not find anyone to hire us.
It was hard. That was you had to be, that was a job. It was hard to come by sometimes.
Right.
Everybody wanted to work at a record store.
Right.
You too, right?
Right. So, but in the book, basically, I was already writing about the vinyl revival in 2016 for a magazine based in New Jersey, the Audiophile Voice. And I did this expose about how this comeback is being underreported by the media. The numbers are far greater. At that point, I had gone to Music Biz event in Nashville, and I met Michael Kurtz there. I sat in on their town hall, and heard like what the retailers were saying about how important Record Store Day was for their business year-round. Actually, it was like every day is Record Store Day from their perspective. So, and in 2017. I received a phone call. Now, in 2013, I actually pitched a friend of mine, Brian Ekis, who I consulted with. He had an organization that represented the last remnants of the replication industry, those last CD manufacturers. And somebody sent me a PDF of a magazine about the vinyl revival. I had no idea that there was a vinyl revival at that point. And I read it, and I was mesmerized by it. And I called Brian. I said, maybe we should do a vinyl-only conference. Like we had done physical media, and we did have a vinyl session, which was always sort of well-received. Steve Sheldon from Rainbow Records in California was one. Don McInnes from RTI, which pressed a lot of the audiophile. He was on that panel. We had a local Las Vegas record store owner talking about. But at that point, I wasn't even convinced it was a real business.
All right. And I got to, first of all, I'll say the first record store I applied for was Wax Trax in Denver, Colorado. And on the application, I put, thinking this would get me hired. If you hire me, you'll be getting at least 75% of the check back. So this did not work there, but it worked at independent records, the much more short-lived independent records on Colfax. So thank you to them. And Zed, you have a specific relationship through resonance with Record Store Day. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I believe those albums are generally released on Record Store Day.
Absolutely. I mean, I will say this again. Record Store Day has provided an unbelievably important foundation for these projects to come out, for them to work with the economics needed to bring them to the marketplace for the label and the investors, because at the end of the day, I'm utilizing other people's monies. But what I can say with great confidence, which has been so inspiring, is that these projects are sustainable. When we do them on vinyl, they ship sold out. Generally speaking, it's not for the long tail. It's for a select number of collectible editions. We've done it at Resonance. I've also done this with Reel to Reel, and obviously with Elemental Music. But I'm such a firm believer in this organization and what they've been able to provide. And it's amazing. It has started a revolution, and so much of this music that I work on, it is heavily based. About 95%, 90% of the releases that I'm doing are Record Store Day, because it's a proven formula. I feel that we've cracked the code to be able to do something of a limited edition size, and to be able to run numbers, and to be able to see how profitable and how it will work. It's very difficult when you're using other people's money, that you really try to be laser focused. And it's amazing. Even, I've said this before, it's like when we build these projects, there are a lot of pizza toppings that go involved in building the supreme release with the photographs and the liner notes. Oh, and yes, we need to make a quality pressing and have beautiful presentation, but yeah, there needs to be a publicity campaign. There needs to be strategy. It's just incredible, though, what Record Store Day has done, and I'm so grateful to the foundation for their endless support of so many of these projects that I've brought to them. They make it possible. But yeah, firm believer.
I just want to call attention. Last Friday night, I was at a concert here in Newark. It was the Max Roach Centennial celebration of We Insist, Freedom Now Suite. And Cassandra Wilson handled Abby Lincoln's vocals and did an amazing job. This entire all-star band was fantastic. And I had never been to the NJ Pack before, and it's as majestic as the Royal Albert Hall or Carnegie Hall. I mean, the acoustics were just pristine. But this was re-released on the Record Store Day.
Really quickly, too. So at first, Larry was showing the Larry Young 10-inch record. Well, anyways, at first with Record Store Day at Resonance, we were doing like EPs like this. There were a whole series of 10-inch records. And I'll never forget, there was one release and it didn't ship like we'd hoped. We did it outside of Record Store Day. And it was from that point forward, probably from around 2016 or so, I said, you know what? The whole enchilada for the vinyl edition, the 12-inch, whether it's the full release, let's give it to Record Store Day. And they kept selling. And everyone was able to go to sleep at night, not worry. I mean, I have to think about in terms of if the number is attainable, if we're going to ship sold out. That has to do with how the numbers work on these projects, which is everything. It's a big part. It's always about the music first and foremost. But at Resonance, it was like, give the whole release on vinyl as an exclusive, and the rest was like history.
That's great. I'm just curious, 'cause I know a lot of time nowadays there's, of course there's like, we're in the Bandcamp era, and I feel like that could just be a whole discussion in itself where, for me in particular, I have Bandcamp. I prefer to get physical music off there to have in my collection, but then, it's accessible to walk around and just play whatever album if I'm not at home. Sure. Since they still have not invented a portable vinyl player of my dreams, try as they might. But was there ever any point that, I don't know if that was as prevalent at the beginning of Resonance, but was there ever any point where you say we have these physical, maybe these limited records out, but then we could do like a digital component, or I don't know, was there ever any thought of doing that or discussion?
Well, I do digital and I do CDs, but LPs have become historically now with Record Store Day the launching pad. That's where it begins. Record Store Day for the release on vinyl is an exclusive, and then the following week doing CD and doing downloads. Truth be told, I like to hold the streaming back until we make a serious dent in the sales of the physical product, of the LPs and the CDs. But I'll do a couple of tracks for streaming, one per disc, for promotion. I want to give people a taste. But I also am a firm believer that, especially in the archival realm, I think a lot of people know what they're getting into. I think people know what certain flavors of ice cream taste like, and there is always this sort of feeling, this is a really important thing, like I feel that these releases are about photographs and booklets and something that is a physical experience, and we're still trying to bring that in this whole other age where it's kind of like going away from that, and that's what I think maybe, pun intended, resonates with people, that there's still a detail and quality that we're striving for. I want to raise the bar as high as we can, and building something that when people go out and purchase one of these projects, they know that it's been thoughtfully curated and a lot of love and hard work from these great teams of people that I work with. My team, I've got a bunch of different folks and designers, and different folks that we work with, and Zach Shelby Cisco and now James Batsford, having these production coordinators that work with me. We're ready to tackle it. But anyways.
So speaking of Bandcamp, in 2019, we had an executive from Bandcamp talk about how the musicians who put their music there digitally, the ones who make the most money are the ones who are actually selling physical product as well. And he had numbers that were really impressive. At the point, they had very ambitious plans to have factories all over the world to produce the vinyl. Since then, I've understand they've gone through some ownership changes, so I don't know what the status is of those plans. But I just want to talk a little bit about how the growth of the vinyl resurgence, to your point about Record Store Day, which it actually ties into all this. What happened in 2017, when we decided to do the first Making Vinyl, we knew that there were about 35 factories on both sides of the Atlantic, of which half of those companies spoke at our event. What we didn't know was that in the audience, there were another dozen to 20 that were about to open plants. Same thing happened the second year in 2018. They exponentially, so 35 in 2017 is now 200 factories around the world. Again, half of them are in the US.
I mean, and that's important too, because we were hitting, until a year ago, longer, capacity issues. What am I talking about? The plants can't take your order for a number of months, maybe even a year at one time, but things were backlogged. But like you said, the booming resurgence of the pressing plants, and even to the point at Resonance Records, we're getting our own press. Like we've been very entrepreneurial about this because it's going to help us ultimately with the bottom line. But that means of doing great quality of work, of course. But it just seemed that it was so difficult to get slotted at one of these manufacturing plants, and now there's capacity galore. How are we going to fill the capacity was the panel discussion that I was a part of at Making Vinyl. I think some people wanted to throw darts at me when I told them even we were opening our own, getting our own press. But that's what happens. It's what it is.
Yeah, and I wonder, I mean, it seems, I don't know, I've gone to Target, and I think even last year there was an Adele record that came out, and I remember a couple independent people saying they were backed up partially because these sort of bigger corporate, because vinyl has now reached that audience.
Well, Billy Fields from Warner Music Group actually had the best answer to that. Adele might have impacted the Sony artists in terms of getting their records made, but at the time when that record came out, there were all these other plants looking for work, and it was just a blip on the radar screen. You know, she was, how many copies? What was it, like about 500,000? I think they said that they produced. First of all, Taylor Swift did twice that many for her last album. And the interesting thing, what we hear now, is the warehouses are stuck with a lot of inventory. So they're not in the just in case. Like in my book, there's a great story about how Fleetwood Mac Rumors was pressed for the first time as a reissue, and they manufactured. The demand was so great. I think Billy said, I think they did like 7,000 when they could have easily done 15. You know, and then they started repressing regularly that record. It still shows up every year in the top 10.
I thought Rumors was like an every dollar bin, or maybe at some point, I guess, yeah, things have changed.
Well, yeah, they are, well, they're not in the dollar bins now anymore. They're like the $10 bins when they come used. But I just want to talk about prices for a second. So this is Dave Brubeck's Timeout. This copy was originally sold for $2.49 at Disco Mat. I remember that. You remember Disco Mat? And in the 80s, I remember going there. And I paid $14.99. It was a pretty good, pressing. It was not scratched up. It sounds great. But the economics just make absolutely no sense for vinyls to succeed today. Because when you think about it, somehow, in Los Angeles alone, there were 15 pressing plants in the heyday of the 60s and 70s, right? A lot of them would do bootlegs. If you had cash, they'll do your... And in fact, I wrote an article for Goldmine about the first rock bootlegger who did the Dylan...
Invisible White Wonder?
Right, great white wonder. And he basically, he told me the whole story. I mean, and there was a great book that came out 2 years ago of that. But, The Pig's Tail. But it defies all technological, economic, ecological sense. But I think the pandemic actually had a lot to do with the resurgence in a way. It was already on the way up. But kids all of a sudden, like, what is this thing? And, our parents are like dusting off the old stereo and how's this work? And my daughter actually gave me this T-shirt, Prague Jazz. She would spend 6 months traveling around Europe, and she saw this and knew I loved jazz. And I pulled out a shirt this morning, and I was like, just by accident, this was the one that came out. I figured, it's an omen. They know.
And I do want to say part of, with, I guess, the resurgence, I always feel, as a hip, I guess, particularly with jazz, I feel like hip hop was my gateway into that. And it's another thing about the physicality of the records. I mean, in digital, you're not looking through and seeing all these credits. On a jazz record, you see this drummer, or if you're looking on the back, you're like, oh, he drummed on this with this band, and and hip hop sort of favors that too. And I feel like, in a sense, that DJ culture, at some point, cats were digging for breaks and just looking for those few seconds of the records, and then they might say, well, damn, the actual rest of this record is great. And that's personally what happened to me, where it kind of started with 70s, and then initially it just became an appreciation even for the standards of jazz. There might have been a time where I may not have put on Kind of Blue, which I know is kind of blasphemous to say in Clem's place as I say it, but so just that gateway of that relationship with the text within the records, looking for the samples, going out to find those records. So it's always kind of felt, at least, maybe that as a smaller subset, but have you done, just research within like hip hop's relationship, the DJ culture?
Yeah, actually, well, at our first making vinyl, we had two keynotes. Jack White, who had just opened up Third Man Pressing in Detroit, where we did the event. But we also had Daryl McDaniels from Run DMC. So when I had some time with Daryl, I told him how I bought the 7-inch of Rockbox because it was, I did have like the message, you know, the old school hip hop records like Grandmaster Flash and stuff like that. I had those records, but I'm pretty picky in terms of hip hop. In terms of, you know, there's not a lot that I've immersed because I've now spent most of my time in jazz to learn. Like, you know, I still buy rock records, but I'm more interested in like third world type of stuff. Reggae was a major part of my life in the 90s. But I've had students over the last couple of years who got me into Kendrick Lamar in particular, you know, so, yeah.
And I remember being a teenager with my friends who listened to hip hop. They had this album, Ice-T, Power. And that's where I first heard Curtis Mayfield's Superfly, that sample from Pusher Man. You know, it's amazing how it has brought a lot of music into the mainstream for people to hear that sample. I mean, it's really cool. Even Kanye and Steely Dan from Kid Charlemagne. I mean, just like, I mean, there's a whole, too many to name.
How about Kanye and King Crimson? Which he actually had to pay because he didn't sample properly.
No comment.
Robert Fripp actually took him to task on that one.
Also, Steely Dan will make you pay if you sample them. So I think they sued, I don't know, Uptown Baby. You can Google it or YouTube it. But
Well, speaking of Steely Dan, I mean, in Newark, Wayne Shorter, you know, he played on Asia.
yes, this is going to be part 2, the Steely Dan discussion. Which I would love to have a full on. I don't know if you share.
I'm an enormous fan. Was deciphering their lyrics back in high school, trying to figure out what they're talking about. Donald Fagen and Walter Becker, and all of the incredible musicians that contributed to those albums. Just unbelievable. Where you're talking about Rick Derringer or Victor Feldman or Wayne Shorter or Steve Gadd, and countless. It's just amazing.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, so back to our sorry. Next time, that's all part 2. We'll leave some for part 2. Let me just ask about. I was curious. I don't know. I'm kind of going off script here, but just record stores. I know both of y'all travel a lot within your fields, and so I guess just basically, what is a favorite city that you've dug in throughout just your collecting? You know, Larry.
Well, I guess internationally, London was the place I visited the most. So I would go to Camden Town for the markets to hit those bins, you know, as much as possible. Then last time I was there was 2 years ago, and you know, spent a lot of money. I broke my backpack because I took too many records back. So I mean, I am going to Iceland in March, and I might actually open with 2 friends of mine a pressing plant. And part of that was I was going to making vinyl, coming back from Amsterdam, and I'm looking at the in-flight entertainment, and my connecting flight was in Iceland. I never heard of any of these artists, and I'm thinking, if there was ever a music scene that needed their own pressing plant, it's that one. So we're, you know, my 2 business partners were really exploring the possibility.
Great.
I gotta say, like, shopping for records is just like, it's just a mania with me around the world. When I go to even a city, where's the closest record store? For me, Shinbayashi in Osaka, Japan is probably a really special place. There are a lot of used record stores there. Tokyo as well. And you know, here in the New York tri-state area, there are always certain stores that I like to go to, but I love shopping for records overseas. And I will tell you that, like, when I'm in Japan, here's something crazy, okay? Where do I find a lot of original pressings, the OGs? When you're in Japan. You know what? Whether it's Disc Union or even Tower, I know that they oftentimes will send agents over to the United States to comb through record stores, to pull those records back and ship them back overseas where they sell them. And I've been in stores. There was a Bud Powell 10-inch record. I was at Disc Union in Osaka. It had this incredible David Stone Martin jacket. And I remember going to that record store and then having the rest of my day And I was like, I got to go back and get that record before I go back to the States. Like, I have to have it. And there's a mania again with collecting, but it's within certain things that criteria, things that I like.
Well, it's called FOMO, fear of missing out. So, like, I never hesitate when I see something, but the problem is I forget I already had it.
Oh.
It just happened again. On the last Friday night, I was in Hoboken, and I bought a second copy of the original Surgeons Gainsbourg, Jane Birkin, the dirty record. I forgot the name of it. But and then I was like, oh, I have that already when I got it home.
Yes, guilty. Overly so many times of doing this. And I'll say I actually like going. I feel like sometimes in certain cities you sort of are dealing with rent-priced records, unfortunately. So I do love finding like off the beaten path spots. And I think in Millville, Revilla Records is a spot I like to go to, where I sometimes am just flipping through releases and being like, is that the price? Like, I'm not going to question it. I'm taking it to the counter, but I always find going into places that are sort of outside of like those high trafficked areas have been some of my best finds. So yeah.
What about estate sales? That's not really record store, but that's something that I did for a long time, 20 years ago. And you'd go to a house. There's a little basket in front with a certain number of people want the Limoges or the jewelry, or they want to have the silverware. Where are the records? And I spent a lot of time doing that. And for a while, I was actually flipping records on eBay. This was 20 years ago. It's a lot of work, the patience to do one of those listings. But I won't lie. I found some very special records, all because you got to be like on the path, like a bloodhound. Where might they be? And you get like, we would have the Gaithersburg Gazette, and I would look at it, and I would see like the classifieds as far as the sales coming that weekend. If they had a telephone number in there, oh boy, you're in trouble. And I would be on the phone, can I just come over beforehand? Oh yeah, we've got some records. And I would scoop sometimes, be the first in there. You got to be tenacious.
So on a Sunday it was about 11 years ago, there was a classified for the estate sale for Marion McPartland, who had a lot to do with her jazz show that on NPR. That's how I learned a lot about jazz. And she had passed away, her estate sale. Now, I found out about this on the Sunday, and I looked at Saturday's paper, and sure enough, the ad was there, and I didn't see it the day before. So I get there early in the morning on Sunday, and the record collection was picked over pretty much. But I did get her copy of Sun Ra. And I also got her copy of Charles Mingus's autobiography, hardcover. So that was kind of special.
Nice.
Awesome. Yes, estate sales, and actually that question I don't have written down that leads me to, because there was that whole just going out and journeying, venturing, being Indiana Jones and so forth. But now we also are in an era where everything is very accessible. So that $1,000 45 that it's now $1,000. Creations Unlimited. Corruption is the thing. In case my birthday is May 16th, if any of you want to get me. But yes, the Discogs era. So how do we feel? I guess maybe the positives, the negatives, because everything is just, in a sense, is there. There's still things that are not going to be out there that you'll have to like get into the trenches to pull. But how do we feel about the accessibility in this digital era?
I think it's good. It puts people in contact with a lot of independent stores. It makes records within reach for people that are looking for them. What was I going to say, though? And it's also interesting because it shows you actual metadata regarding how many people are actually looking for something. So there'll be times where I'm looking through a label's discography trying to determine if I want to be involved. Maybe it's an exercise of reissuing it. Let's see what they're going for, these copies, and how many people really want it. It's a great barometer for that, and I think it's great. And it's helped connect, like I said, a lot of people are finding something that they want. There could be some record store in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in a random part of the country, and if they've got it, they can list there. And there's also an RSD marketplace, which we should talk about as well, because that now is a very viable service as well for the independent record stores to be able to list these releases that they have so that they find people.
Unfortunately, when somebody passes away, I realize I have holes in my collection. So Les McCann, about a month ago, and I heard Compared to What on WBGO, and I was like, why don't I know this? I sort of knew of the song, but I didn't really understand the significance as a piece of social history. And so I went on Discogs. I found one for about $20, including shipping. The pressing is pretty good. Original from 1969. I did that recently with Cannonball Adderley. I wasn't that he passed away, but I heard Mercy, Mercy, Mercy on, again, it was a Discogs. And this was actually, I think it's an English pressing, but it was an American store that sold it to me for about $20. I was like, wow, really happy about that.
I want to also put a little plug in there, too. I had the really great fortune of my team at Resonance to work with the great Les McCann before he passed. And just in November, we released an album called Never a Dull Moment, live from coast to coast, which were recordings from 1966 at the Penthouse in Seattle and at the Village Vanguard in 1967, which I highly recommend. I had to put in that little plug there because Les McCann was really he was a Renaissance man. You're holding this album right here, Layers, and he made an album called Invitation to Openness, which were pioneering albums in electronic music. Don't let me take your words from you. But really important, man. This guy was an A&R man working with, helped discover Roberta Flack and worked with Joel Dorn at Atlantic. He was a photographer. He was a really brilliant man, and he really pioneered soul jazz or whatever you wanted, however you want to call it. And he had different sides of him, too. But powerful pianist, amongst other things. I'm just a big fan.
Hey, Zev, I just want to check the time.
Oh, sure.
But you're
Coming up on 7:05.
okay.
Yeah, so I don't know if we want to open up for any questions or just keep it, I know we got there's still plenty to say and ask, but I know generally we do at MPL 10, 15 minutes of questions. So, although I don't know if we can see anything, these lights I feel like a star right now.
Okay.
So I don't know. I guess you would just all shout out if not. Oh, there we go.
Okay, so I have two questions that are two very different questions. The first is how, as far as the manufacturing of records, what determines a good quality as far as, I don't know what it's made of. Is it made of plastic or rubber? I have no idea what it's made out of. But as far as oh, vinyl. Sorry. But as far as the quality of it, the grooves and things like that, what's the difference and what determined a better sounding? When I listened to my original Diane Reeves album, Welcome to My Love, versus the CD, it's just, a different sound. And then my second question was just a comment about, I just think it's so interesting how for Black artists, particularly during the 70s, you see these dynamic images of folks that before videos, you really got to see all of these kind of progressive images. I think for folks, because you didn't have that, what we have on television and the internet now. So that was a comment. But the first one was just a pure manufacturing.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah, so let me, so she's asking about the quality of pressing for vinyl records, and a comment I also agree on of the for one thing, which I think vinyl presented well, just the visibility of Black artists, some fairly stylistic Black artists, at least in my collection. and the importance of just that imagery. I hope I'm doing justice to that comment. So yeah, but also, yeah, Larry, to see that to you, the quality of pressing, the difference
Sure.
in qualities.
So the manufacturing process hasn't really changed in 75 years. The LP was introduced in 75 years ago, in fact, the anniversary. It is made out of something called polyvinyl chloride, which is an oil-based byproduct. It also requires, as a stabilizer, toxic materials such as lead and cadmium, which the European Union has basically banned because of the toxicity of it. The American EPA somehow doesn't mind. Now, it really only makes a difference if the records are going in landfills, which they're really not. And there is recycling going on. Most pressing plants regrind. There are a lot of experiments going on now to use other types of non-PVC, but a plastic material. But there's also something, and Zev heard this at the last conference, a lot of what they call bioplastics, which, some of it is actually biodegradable, and some of it's not even plastic. They were experimenting with all kinds of materials, including hemp. So, yeah. So, I mean, I've seen demonstrations of records made out of coffee, of soap, you name it, it's possible, yeah.
But there are a couple of factors, right, when we talk about a great pressing. First of all, let's talk about the music. How is it recorded? Is it something that's made recent or something that's from a primitive source? It really depends on the source you have, how good it was recorded to begin with. And then when we talk about the pressing, though, we can talk about how many minutes are on a side. It really depends. There is a certain number of cycles, as George Claben at Resonance has talked to me, that you're able to achieve. And that really has to do with the listening. An engineer like Bernie Grunman or Kevin Gray, when they're cutting it, the time per side can affect that. But it really ultimately, first of all, it's about the quality of the recording. But look, an 180 gram, 200 gram versus 120, there are some of these things that are very luxurious, and they actually can enhance, I think, a lot of the listening. And it's really difficult for me to articulate. I think an engineer, a recording engineer, could speak to this in greater detail. But what do you think?
Well, it's a complicated process. It starts with, they say the best source materials are the analog tape, but that's kind of rare for records to be made. Although on the lower volumes, it's probably more like some of the stuff that you're working with. But on the other hand, if you're using digital sources, which there's nothing wrong with if it sounds great, but there are different points in the process, the plating, you make a mother to the father, so you get both sides of the record. It starts with the lacquer coming off of the tape or the digital source, and the tiniest little mess up could affect the sound. One side could sound different than the other side, and sometimes the presses. That's why they do quality control, which is also another thing that all the pressing plants, they can't listen to every single record off the press, but they do some sort of quota system.
Oh, sorry, mic is caught. There we go. Yeah, thank you both. And I actually did want to ask you, Grammy-nominated producer, just so please, you give it.
It took a whole. I work with a team of people, and I'm very lucky. I get to be the face of the operation. There were several of us on that Nat King Cole Hitting the Ramp box set. That's the Grammy-nominated release that I had the great privilege of being a part of.
That's
yeah,
great.
thanks.
And, and I did want to ask just how much, as far as the production, maybe how and your archival work, any of that feed into like the production side of the work that y'all do on Resonance?
Well, whether it's Resonance or reel-to-reel or Elemental, of course, it's always about really trying to create the highest quality product. If we're going to do this in this time now, when I see it like this, folks have so many different places they can be spending their income. And if we're going to do something for music and for a vinyl, I try to, for my productions, to make it as great as it can be in terms of having the best presentation of the audio and the music, but also having a presentation which is so deluxe. And I just feel that in this time right now, it's very important to build the highest quality release. Even if something additionally, initially did not have expansive liner notes, or I don't know, some things are coming out for the first time. There are certain releases where I'll include other audio. But anyways, my point is make it as great as it can be. And that's really my mantra.
Yeah, actually, at the first Making Vinyl, Jack White basically told the standing room audience, make something beautiful. And it was exactly what Zev was just saying.
If you build it, they will come.
All right. Gotcha.
What are your favorite recording studios? Like some of your favorites, too.
Just for the.
For this gentleman right here. Quality sound.
Okay, let me just repeat for the viewing audience. So, what is our panelist's favorite recording studio? So, whoever. Studios, plural.
Well, it's really also about the engineer and who's working with you there. Who's in the driver's seat, right? But I'll tell you, I've had a chance of working with some very interesting studios. First of all, working with, for instance, Bernie Grunman mastering at his studios in Hollywood, working with Kevin Gray at Coherent Audio, working with Matt Luthans, who actually works for Coherent and the mastering lab. But, personally, two places come to mind. I've had a chance, thanks to my dear friend Corey Weeds, of going to Rudy Van Gelder's studios in Inglewood Cliffs. That was something like going to Mecca for a lot of people. And it's still a very overwhelmingly powerful experience being in that room where that music is recorded. And also, several years ago, because of Blue Note Records and my work there, we worked on a complete Lee Morgan Live at the Lighthouse box set with Steve Jenowick at the controls, and we did that at Capitol Studios in Studio A, by the way. Amazing. That was a whole process too, but it's incredible.
That's the Capitol Tower too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and that's where Sinatra and Nat
I
King
saw
Cole
I saw the
recorded.
the microphone. Yeah, it's pretty
Amazing. Yeah. So a bunch of places, and this is where I get my inner geek on. For sure. It's overwhelming, especially when you live for the music like we do, having the privilege of being in some of these institutions. Incredible.
Any studios you visited or?
Well, I haven't visited yet, but I wanted to go to Electric Ladyland because Jimi Hendrix built it. And also, one of the records I actually brought with me tonight was Gil Evans live at Sweet Basil. Jimi Hendrix was supposed to record an album with Gil Evans, but unfortunately he passed away before they were going to do it a few days later. Gil actually went and did his own Jimi Hendrix album about 2 years later. I don't really like that album. I think had Jimmy been around, it would have been a great record. Although I did get to see a Sweet Basil concert with Gil conducting, which was just an amazing experience. It sort of changed my life. As did, I just want to mention another record, because we've talked mostly about guys. Nina Simone, the first time I heard Four Women on the radio, it changed my life. I mean, the drama in that song is just amazing. This is one of my favorite all-time records.
Absolutely.
By the way, I have to brag. I actually went to Electric Ladyland Studios back in the 90s when I worked at Polygram. we did a record release event for a live Queen album on Hollywood Records, and I got to walk inside in that place. It was like unbelievable. All the years walking back and forth outside. That's another incredible.
I've been to Abbey Road a couple times. So that, yeah, I mean, to see the ceiling and know the Beatles were there and seeing the photographs and saying, oh my God, the vibes. Yeah.
These things matter for guys like us, folks like us. Anybody, if you've been touched by the music, it's amazing.
Awesome. I'm going to ask this question so I can have an excuse to reach for mine, but maybe a holy grail record. Something you're still tracking down or, I don't know, close to finding, reconnecting with, just, either Larry or Zev, you want to.
Is it a record or is it some tape that might exist?
It could be both.
Why don't I tell you about the tape?
Yeah, I would love to hear it.
This has been going on for a long time. And Bill Laswell once told me, no, Zev, you're not crazy. I've heard rumors for years of it existing as well. And that there has been a rumor for a long time that John Coltrane and Larry Young made some home recordings at the house, I believe, in Dix Hills, in the studio, and the tapes have never been found. And I've had a chance to have the good fortune of knowing Larry Young III for a while, and we've been kind of like looking around, like wondering where could this be. And we have some clues. We kind of, in fact, even think we know who has them. But there is often this you just got to be, like I said, tenacious, and if you look, you keep working and you keep asking, and sometimes these tapes will come out.
Well, I know that it couldn't have been in Dix Hills because that studio wasn't built until after John Coltrane passed away. Alice Coltrane built the studio in the house, and she recorded her own albums there.
Maybe it's not. There was some recordings that they had rumored to have made together.
But yeah, it was probably maybe it was Van Gelder's place or someplace like that. Yeah.
And then I don't know.
I mentioned a Holy Grail before. I forgot what it was.
Maybe you did, yeah. Or maybe it was something in the box.
It's like when I go in the bins, that's when I realized, oh, I've been looking for this, but it's like I can't think of it. I don't keep lists anymore because it's better to be surprised.
Maybe an OG Hank Mobley 1500 series original. These are the ones that you see going for massive bucks online. Some of these records are amazing because they were also made in very limited quantities originally. They weren't massively produced until they kept being reissued year after year. Well, not year after year, but many times after.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, and maybe we could, I'm just holding up the Camille. I have to give salute to Camille Yarbrough, which is a record made popular by Fatboy Slim? I think Take Your Praise You. So this was a record when I went searching for it. Partially probably because of that, it went up pretty high. So I, at one point, was not much of a reissue person, but in recent years, when I look at a record and see, oh, it's $500, but there's a reissue that has liner notes, an interview, and all this other backstory, and probably sounds as good as the original. These are the type of records I'm out. The work that Zed does, and this is, I think, from Vanguard. So I had to throw a salute to Sister Yarbrough, who's still with us. But so, yeah. There we go. Bigger than any magazine, indeed. Yes. Sweet.
Oh, that's right. Let's do that.
All right. So
thank you for remembering. Oh, okay. So I was actually supposed to show this in June in Minneapolis. We did our final session in conversation between me and Nabil Ayers, whose dad was Roy Ayers. And Nabil actually talked about this in his book, and he emailed me the video. So let's see what's happening.
all right. I say roll tape.
So we have a feeling that there's an old-fashioned record player at the Vice President's home in Northwest DC because the Vice President, Kamala Harris, picked up some vinyl yesterday. The Vice President went shopping at HR Records. It's a black-owned business on Kennedy Street in Northwest DC. Harris greeted the store staff, other customers inside, and then showed off her purchases on the sidewalk in front of the store.
Charlie Mingus, really one of the greatest jazz performers ever. One of my favorite albums of all time. Roy Ayers, Everybody Loves Sunshine. You know this one? It's so good. It's a classic. And then Porgy and Bess.
All right. She's got some good selections there, kind of running the gamut in terms of genres. While the Vice President was happy to talk about her recent purchases, she ignored a shouted question about the debt ceiling. Very Washington.
On that note, I have one copy of the book to give away. So I want to hear from the audience. What was the first jazz record you purchased, and what do you remember about it? First person who yells it out, I guess, gets the book.
Glory of Love.
Okay. Thank you. Do you remember when you got it and where you got it?
The story is my older brother was a big jazz fan, and he claimed to read the list that was published in Playboy. And at somewhere around that time, he picked that out.
All right. Here you go. Thank you so much.
Awesome. All right. Awesome. There we go. Yeah.
Thank you. So in the early 80s, CDs seemed to address everything everybody hated about record albums. They were smaller, they lasted much longer, maybe forever. They were pristine in terms of the quality. There was no pops, there were no clicks. That eventually became charming. And then at some point, CDs started to wane and the vinyl resurgence happened. What happened to all the criteria that made CDs so attractive for so long and gave way to vinyl, which is remaining inconvenient and large and, you know.
So in my book, basically.
Oh,
you
sorry.
asked this-
Yeah, just for the listening and viewing audience. So I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure what the quality of CDs, what happened, or was that? How was that? Sorry, succinctly. I know you said the CD quality. How is it not translated to vinyl? Or
No,
sorry.
CDs became very popular because they answered everything that everyone hated about a record at the time, where it would get dusty, it would get noisy, it was large, it took up space, it warped in the, everything you could think about in terms of listening to music was a problem. And CDs successfully addressed those problems. But now that seems to have disappeared from everyone's concerns.
So I think what happened was the record industry in the late 70s had to reinvent itself, especially in the early 80s. MTV, there was music with pictures for free if you had cable TV, I guess, that was the caveat. But video games actually became the pastime of teenagers. They couldn't care less about music at that point. So they managed to convince the public they had to pay twice as much for something they might have owned previously. And the same way, it's like history repeating itself. So the same people like Zev back in the CD era were finding concerts that were never released before and all kinds of extras to add on to the albums to make it enticing to buy again. On the sound quality, you're right. I mean, the surface noise was something that bothered me, which is one of the reasons I gravitated towards CDs. But now that I went around the cycle again, I do A/B tests every once in a while. It depends, again, it goes back to that particular pressing. It depends on there were bad CDs too early on. A lot of times they would take, this is interesting, they would take the vinyl masters and put it on a CD. And then today, we also get CD masters on vinyl, which sounds like crap. So, as Zev was saying, Bernie Grumman, Kevin Gray, they're the scientists. They know how to make the thing sound the best.
Awesome.
I mean, I still listen to CDs too. I listen to a lot of stuff. And you know, I don't know. I find different things that I like, and I love my classical vinyl, and I love listening to it on CD as well. I don't know. It's really about, and some things are easier to find. You know what? It's that Ray Draper Coltrane record going for over $1,000. I'll be okay with the CD. You know.
Absolutely. And I guess.
Time for one more question.
All right.
Not to cut you off.
Nope, that's fine. Yeah. So if we have one more question, or.
Sure, yeah. When you're like doing reissues, right, and it might be like an older, more obscure recording, is it ever difficult to like know who's playing on it and to maybe track down like descendants of people who you have to pay royalties to and things like that? You have to do like some sort of like detective work in your archival work. Have you ever like hit a wall when you found like maybe like a really obscure recording and you just couldn't figure out who was on it or who some of the musicians were?
Is that
Oh, yeah. So let's see. Basically, question about finding artists. You know, if there's any difficulty ever in finding artists for the reissues on Resonance. So.
I like to use, and by the way, I like to use the word archival discovery. It's never been out before in most cases, but you know what? Finding the sidemen on the project, paying the music publishing, but doing your research, finding out. Very lucky because I'm oftentimes dealing with live tapes, so it's usually been documented. And I think there have only been a couple of instances where it hasn't been known. But generally speaking, through our due diligence, we're able to uncover that information. So, and by the way, and I have a private investigator that I also work. They call me the jazz detective, but I have a gentleman that I work with. We're literally scouring online databases, finding phone numbers, finding musicians' relatives, having to find an obituary and find out who the relatives are, finding those relatives. I've even done one crazy one. One time, I can't remember which project was, reached out to a cemetery where an artist was buried because we knew that there was a reverse method of finding out who the family members were, and we were able to make it happen. I've done things all sorts of ways, but we need to, and it's very important. Intellectual property rights are no joke for crediting musicians and making sure that people are paid and acknowledging them for that work. There are record labels throughout the world, especially in certain parts overseas, who will just put stuff out without even doing the right thing and paying them. And I don't know, in the United States we have much stricter IP copyright laws, and that's a very good thing because I feel that we respect the artists here. But anyways, just wanted to provide that information to you as well.
I love that.
Well, it's my team, and you know, anyways.
I feel like that's a strong message to wrap up on. You know, this music enriches our lives. Please take every measure possible to pay and acknowledge their work and uplift it. So I think that's it. Thank you. Yeah, actually, please give it up for both these gentlemen here. Appreciate the work y'all do. Inspired. I may have to talk to you about becoming a music detective if I can get on the team.
Let's do it.
I mean, 75% of what you pay me will probably be going back into the record label.
Let's do it.
If that works.
All right, guys, let's hear it. Come on. Give them a round of applause. Thank you so much, you guys. That was awesome. That's it. That's all right.
Did I just set this down?